Picture a river so mighty that its very existence held the power to crown kings and crumble dynasties. Not a mythical legend, but a real, roaring waterway that once carved its path through the heart of ancient Asia, only to vanish without a trace, leaving behind a trail of shattered empires and unanswered questions. This is the story of how a single river's disappearance rewrote the map of an entire continent, toppling civilizations that once seemed untouchable. Historians have spent decades piecing together the clues, and what they've uncovered is nothing short of astonishing. Trade routes that suddenly went silent, cities abandoned overnight, and power struggles that shifted the course of history. Think about the rivers you know today, the lifeblood of cities, the highways of trade, the sources of survival. Now imagine one of those rivers simply disappearing. The chaos that would follow, the desperate scramble for water, the collapse of economies, the wars that would erupt over what remained. That's exactly what happened in ancient Asia, but on a scale so vast it altered the destiny of entire nations. This lost river wasn't just a source of water, it was the backbone of empires, the silent ruler behind thrones, the invisible hand guiding the rise and fall of kings. And when it vanished, it didn't just leave a gap, it created a domino effect that reshaped the world. Today, we're going to follow the footprints of this vanished giant, tracing its path through crumbling ruins, deciphering ancient texts, and unraveling the mysteries it left behind. How could a river so powerful just disappear? What happened to the people who depended on it? And why did its absence send shockwaves through history? The answers lie buried in the sands of time, waiting to be uncovered. So join me as we step into the past, where every clue brings us closer to understanding the river that reversed empires and the lessons its story holds for us today. Long before empires rose and fell along its banks, this legendary river was born from the raw forces of nature, a perfect storm of ice, rain, and shifting earth. Picture the towering glaciers of the Himalayas, their ancient ice melting under relentless sunlight, sending torrents of water crashing down mountain slopes. Combine that with monsoon rains so heavy they could drown entire valleys, and you have the recipe for a river unlike any other. But the true magic happened underground, where tectonic plates groaned and shifted, carving deep channels into the landscape. Over centuries, these forces sculpted a waterway so vast it could swallow smaller rivers whole, a serpent of water twisting through the heart of Asia, fed by 1,000 mountain streams. What made this river extraordinary wasn't just its size, but its temperament. Unlike the predictable Nile or the steady Indus, this river danced to its own rhythm. Some years it would barely rise above its banks, leaving fertile silt untouched. Other years it would explode in fury, swallowing villages whole and redrawing its own course overnight. These wild floods earned it a reputation both as a giver of life and a bringer of destruction. Yet for all its unpredictability, civilizations flocked to its shores. Why? Because when the river smiled, it offered something priceless, soil so rich that crops sprouted like magic, turning barren land into bread baskets overnight. And then there was the trade. The river's currents became highways for merchants carrying spices, silks, and gems from distant lands. Its waters teemed with fish so plentiful that no one ever feared hunger. Along its banks, cities sprouted like reeds, their docks bustling with boats from kingdoms no one had ever heard of. At its height, the river wasn't just a geographic feature. It was the heartbeat of a continent, a force so central to daily life that cultures worshipped it as a god. Temples lined its shores, their priests interpreting every ripple as a divine message. Kings built their capitals within sight of its waters, knowing that whoever controlled the river controlled the future. But beneath this prosperity lurked a fragile truth. The river's very existence depended on a delicate balance. The glaciers that fed it were retreating even then, inch by inch. The monsoons, once reliable, grew erratic, and the land itself, strained by centuries of human activity, began to rebel. The stage was set for a catastrophe no one saw coming, one that would prove even the mightiest river is no match for the slow, silent forces of change. Among the first to master this river's rhythms were the Harappans, a civilization so advanced their cities rivaled those of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Picture streets laid out in perfect grids, with baked brick houses equipped with indoor plumbing luxuries Europe wouldn't see for another 3,000 years. But none of this would have been possible without the river's gifts. Every summer, floodwaters would deposit thick layers of silt, turning the land into a farmer's paradise. The Harappans didn't just rely on these floods, they engineered them, building intricate networks of canals and reservoirs to stretch every drop of water further than nature intended. Their granaries overflowed with surplus wheat and barley, fueling trade routes that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Himalayas. Then came the Mauryans, who turned the river's bounty into an empire. Under rulers like Chandragupta and Ashoka, the river became the spine of a vast administrative machine. Tax collectors measured harvests along its banks, while royal messengers raced along waterways to deliver decrees. The Mauryans didn't just use the river, they weaponized it. Controlling its waters meant controlling the food supply, and controlling the food supply meant absolute power. Their capital, Pataliputra, sprawled across the river's confluence like a spider at the center of a web, its docks crammed with warships and grain barges. But the river's true legacy wasn't just in bricks or bureaucracies, it was in the minds of the people who worshipped it. Temples along its shores buzzed with priests interpreting omens in the water's swirls. Festivals celebrated its floods as divine blessings, while droughts sent kings scrambling to appease the gods. The river wasn't just a resource, it was a living deity, its moods dictating the fate of millions. And when it shifted, as rivers sometimes do, it didn't just change its course, it rewrote history. The river's currents carried more than just water. They were liquid highways humming with the voices of 100 cultures, the creak of merchant ships, and the clink of goods changing hands. Imagine a single boat drifting downstream, its hull packed with Persian silver, Chinese silk, and Indian spices so pungent they could be smelled from the shore. This was the river's true power, not just nourishing crops, but stitching together a tapestry of civilizations that might never have met otherwise. Take something as simple as a clay pot. Archaeologists digging along the river's ancient banks have found identical pottery styles separated by thousands of miles, proof that ideas flowed as freely as the water. A design born in one village would travel downstream, copied and adapted by the next, until it became a universal language of craftsmanship. But it wasn't just parts. Inscriptions carved into temple walls reveal how Sanskrit prayers from the Ganges mingled with Buddhist chants from the highlands, creating hybrid scripts that scholars are still deciphering today. Even religions hitched rides on merchant ships, with statues of Hindu gods appearing suddenly in distant ports, their worship spreading faster than any missionary could walk. The real luxury items, though, tell the most vivid stories. Dive into the cargo holds of sunken trade vessels, and you'll find peppercorns from Kerala nestled beside Mesopotamian lapis lazuli, their blue so deep it seemed to hold the night sky. These weren't just goods, they were status symbols, transforming local chiefs into cosmopolitan kings who served foreign delicacies on imported plates. A single spice like cinnamon could travel from Sri Lanka to Babylon without ever leaving the river's network, each handoff adding value like a game of whispers. But the river's greatest export wasn't something you could hold. It was ideas. Mathematics from the Indus Valley sailed north to influence Chinese astronomers. Medical knowledge from Taxila floated south to healers in Java. Even musical scales blended as lutes and flutes crossed paths in bustling delta markets, their melodies merging into something entirely new. This constant churn of cultures didn't just enrich societies, it created entirely new ones. Kingdoms that started as trading posts grew into glittering metropolises where a dozen languages echoed in the streets, and no one batted an eye at a Greek philosopher debating an Indian mystic over cups of Central Asian tea. Yet all this exchange had a fragile heartbeat. The river didn't just connect places, it made them dependent on each other. When droughts struck upstream, downstream markets starved for goods. When floods wiped out a port city, the ripple effect could bankrupt merchants 3 kingdoms away. The very web that brought prosperity also wove a trap, one that would snap catastrophically when the river itself began to fade. But for centuries, this watery highway hummed with life, proving that a river's true power isn't in its depth, but in how far its influence can reach. The first warnings came quietly, almost unnoticed, like a whisper lost in the roar of daily life. Farmers along the river's middle reaches were the earliest to sense something was wrong. The floods, once as reliable as the sunrise, began arriving late or not at all. Monsoon rains, which had nourished the land for generations, turned erratic, drowning fields one year and vanishing the next. Ancient irrigation canals, meticulously maintained for centuries, suddenly ran dry, their cracked beds baking under a relentless sun. But the river's decline wasn't just an act of nature. Human hands had tipped the scales. Forests that once captured rainfall and fed the river's tributaries were steadily stripped away, cleared for farmland, fuel, or sprawling cities hungry for timber. Without those natural sponges, water rushed away in violent flash floods, leaving the land parched between storms. Archaeologists studying sediment layers have uncovered startling proof of this slow unraveling. Deep beneath modern fields, they've found bands of coarse, pebble-filled sand, evidence of sudden, destructive floods, alternating with layers of dust so fine it could only mean prolonged drought. One particularly telling discovery came from a ruined granary near the river's ancient delta. Its floor was buried under a thick blanket of silt, as if a final, catastrophic flood had drowned the building mid-harvest. But above that layer, nothing, just sterile soil, proof that the waters never returned. The economic shockwaves were immediate. With harvests failing, grain prices skyrocketed. Traders who once grew rich moving spices and silks now fought over sacks of millet. River ports that thrived for 1,000 years were abandoned within decades, their docks left to rot as merchants shifted to overland routes. Tax records from the Mauryan Empire's twilight years revealed desperate measures, kings slashing grain taxes to stave off famine, only to watch their treasuries empty. In one haunting letter, a provincial governor pleads with the emperor for help, writing, "The people eat husks meant for cattle, and still the children cry with hunger." Yet the most chilling changes were cultural. Temples that had celebrated the river as a life-giving god began hosting darker rituals. Excavations have uncovered altars stacked with broken pottery, likely offerings from farmers begging for rain. Some inscriptions tell of kings marching statues of river deities through barren fields, hoping to awaken their slumbering power, but the river wasn't sleeping. It was retreating, its lifeblood siphoned away by shifting climates and the very civilizations it had nurtured. And as the water faded, so did the empires built upon its banks, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow, suffocating withering like a plant cut off from its roots. The cruelest irony, those who suffered most were furthest downstream. While upstream communities could dig deeper wells or shift crops, delta cities had no escape. Salt water from the advancing sea poisoned their fields, turning breadbaskets into wastelands. Archaeologists working in these regions find eerie evidence of orderly retreats, homes emptied methodically, valuables carried away, but also tragic signs of those who stayed too long. In one abandoned house, a single child's sandal rests beside a hearth filled with ashes from the last fire. This wasn't the abrupt catastrophe of an earthquake or invasion. It was a creeping disaster unfolding over generations, each season a little drier than the last. Parents who grew up with stories of the river's abundance watched their children come of age in a world where water was measured by the cup rather than the flood. And by the time rulers realized their empires were crumbling, the river had already written their epitaph, not in stone but in silent, shifting sands. The first cracks appeared in the Mauryan Empire, a civilization so vast it stretched from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal. For centuries, its strength had flowed from the river, grain to feed its armies, waterways to move its troops, and fertile lands to fill its coffers with taxes. But as the river's waters grew unpredictable, so did the empire's fate. Harvests that once yielded enough surplus to stock royal granaries for years began to fail. Records from the reign of Emperor Ashoka's successors tell a grim story. Entire provinces reporting crop yields so meager that soldiers went unpaid, their loyalty crumbling like the dry earth beneath their feet. Then came the tipping point, the abandonment of Pataliputra's docks. For generations, this bustling port had been the empire's economic heartbeat, where ships laden with spices, gems, and grain jostled for space. But as the river shallowed, merchants watched in horror as their heavy-laden vessels ran aground on newly exposed sandbars. Within a decade, the docks fell silent. Warehouses that once overflowed with goods stood empty, their doors swinging in the wind. The empire's lifeblood trade was bleeding out. Chaos spread faster than anyone anticipated. In the eastern provinces, desperate farmers revolted when imperial tax collectors demanded grain that simply didn't exist. Scrolls recovered from a burned administrative building describe villages banding together to drive out officials, their messages pleading for reinforcements that never came. Meanwhile, nomadic tribes from the arid northwest, their own lands parched beyond survival, smelled weakness. They swept down through the empire's withered defenses like a sandstorm, looting cities already starving from within. The final blow came in the capital itself. A clay tablet unearthed near Putna's ruins preserves a frantic last order from the emperor's court: move the treasury to the highlands. But it was too late. By then, the river had shifted so dramatically that the city's moats, once brimming with water as a symbol of imperial might, stood dry. Invaders didn't even need siege engines. They simply walked across the cracked mud where rivers had flowed. Within months, the Mauryan dynasty, which had ruled for over 150 years, collapsed into squabbling fragments. Yet the most haunting evidence of this downfall isn't in battle records or crumbling walls, it's in the bones. Archaeologists examining skeletons from this period find stunted growth in children and adults riddled with signs of malnutrition. In one mass grave near an abandoned market, skeletons lie tangled together, their fingers clutching empty bowls. These weren't victims of war, but of thirst and hunger, casualties of a river that no longer kept its promises. The Mauryans' fate became a warning for every empire downstream. As the river retreated, it didn't just take water, It took order, stability, and the very idea of permanence. Kings who had once styled themselves as gods watched helplessly as their power evaporated like morning mist over a dying stream, and in the silence left behind, a new truth echoed. No throne, no army, no wall could stand when the river itself turned its back. The vanishing river didn't just drown one empire, it sent shockwaves rippling across the continent, toppling kingdoms like a line of dominoes. Picture a merchant caravan arriving at a bustling Central Asian trading post, only to find the warehouses empty and the wells dry. The news spread faster than wildfire. The great river was failing, and with it, the economic lifeline of half the known world. Overnight, trade routes that had thrived for centuries became death traps, littered with abandoned carts and the bones of those who gambled on finding water. In the power vacuum left by the Mauryans, warlords and petty kings scrambled for control, turning once peaceful regions into battlegrounds. One surviving scroll from Bactria describes a desperate plea from a city governor. Bandits choke the roads, our children starve, and the river's silence has driven men mad. To the west, the Parthians watched in alarm as their eastern trade partners collapsed. Silk Road caravans that once delivered Indian spices and dyes now arrived with half-empty saddles or didn't arrive at all. The Parthian response was swift and brutal. They seized key mountain passes, taxing surviving traders into poverty to prop up their own faltering economy. Meanwhile, in the Gangetic plains, displaced farmers migrated en masse, clashing with settled communities in a struggle for fertile land. Archaeologists have uncovered mass graves near ancient village sites, their skeletons bearing wounds from improvised weapons, hoes reforged into spears, grinding stones used as bludgeons. But the deadliest export wasn't conflict, it was disease. As populations crowded into shrinking oases, sanitation systems failed. A Chinese envoy's diary from this period describes a Kushan border town where the air reeks of death and the streets flow with filth. Soon, outbreaks of dysentery and cholera raced along the remaining trade routes, killing more people than any sword. The bacterium responsible for the Justinian plague centuries later may have first mutated in these desperate, water-starved communities. Yet amid the chaos, new powers rose. The Kushans, once minor horse lords, exploited the disruption to carve out an empire stretching from Afghanistan to the Ganges. Their secret, adapting to the river's absence, they shifted to camel caravans that could cross arid zones, built underground irrigation canals called kanats, and taxed not grain but the precious metals mined from hills no one had bothered with when the river flowed. Their coins, stamped with images of both Buddha and Zoroastrian fire altars, tell the story of a new Asia, one forged not by a river's bounty but by its loss. Far to the south, maritime trade boomed as merchants abandoned inland routes entirely. Ports like Baragaza and Muziris swelled with ships sailing directly to Rome and Alexandria, bypassing the dying river's network. Pepper that once took months to travel overland now reached the Mediterranean in weeks, sparking a culinary revolution in Europe. But this convenience came at a cost. Coastal cities grew fat while inland withered, deepening regional inequalities that still echo today. The cruelest twist, some cultures saw the river's retreat as divine punishment. In Gandhara, archaeologists found a shattered stupa buried under layers of wind-blown sand. Among its ruins lay a clay tablet with a monk's final inscription. The river has left us, and with it the Buddha's mercy. Yet just a valley away, another monastery thrived by digging deep wells, proof that survival in this new world required more than prayer. It demanded reinvention. What began as an ecological crisis became a continental reckoning, proving that when a civilization's foundation crumbles, everything built upon it must either adapt or perish. The river's silence didn't just end an era, it forced the birth of a different Asia, one where resilience mattered more than tradition, and where the map of power was redrawn not by kings, but by the relentless logic of a changing earth. The river's final act wasn't a dramatic collapse. No single earthquake or landslide delivered the killing blow. Instead, it slipped away like a ghost, its retreat so gradual that generations passed before anyone realized it was truly gone. Geologists studying sediment cores have pieced together a haunting timeline. In the deepest layers, they find thick bands of fertile silt, proof of the river's prime. Higher up, the silt thins to mere whispers, alternating with layers of wind-blown sand, a telltale sign of shrinking waters. Then, around 1500 years ago, the silt stops altogether. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. One prevailing theory points to a deadly combination of natural shifts and human hands. Ancient texts describe a series of massive earthquakes in the Himalayan foothills around this time, powerful enough to make the gods tremble. These quakes likely blocked or diverted key tributaries, starving the main river of its lifeblood. But human activity accelerated the crisis. Deforestation upstream reduced rainfall retention, while over-irrigation downstream siphoned off what little water remained. Satellite images of the region reveal eerie scars pale, twisting lines across the landscape that match descriptions of the river's old course. These ghost channels, visible only from space, trace paths where water once flowed but never will again. The most compelling evidence, though, comes from an unexpected source: medieval drought poetry. In verses scratched onto palm leaves, poets from the 6th century describe fishing boats stranded in fields, their hulls cracking under the sun. One particularly vivid poem laments, "The river's tongue has forgotten how to speak, and the land grows deaf with thirst." Archaeologists have found these abandoned boats exactly where the poems describe, miles from any modern water source, their timbers dated to the river's final centuries. Not everyone agrees on the timeline. Some historians argue for a sudden death, pointing to a 7th century Chinese traveler's account of a great roaring in the night near the river's delta, followed by silence. They speculate a catastrophic breach, perhaps a levee failure, that sent the river's last waters spilling into a new channel, leaving its old bed to bake in the sun. Others cite temple inscriptions warning of the river's anger, suggesting communities knew disaster was coming but couldn't stop it. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Core samples from the delta show sudden layers of saltwater intrusion, proof that as the river weakened, the sea rushed in, poisoning the land with brine. This wasn't just disappearance, it was a slow-motion replacement, where the ocean claimed what the river could no longer hold. Villages that had endured for centuries found their wells turning salty overnight, their fields crusted with white crystals that no crop could survive. Perhaps the most haunting clue comes from a set of ancient administrative records found in a ruined granary. They detail a decades-long project to dredge the river's main channel, with each year's entries growing more desperate. The final note, scrawled in shaky script, reads simply, "The water will not come." It's a stark admission the moment when even the engineers admitted defeat. The river wasn't just fading, it was already gone, its memory lingering only in the cracked earth and the bewildered faces of those left behind. What makes this vanishing so unsettling is how ordinary it seems at first glance. Rivers shift course all the time, but this was different, not a bend in the path, but the erasure of the path itself. The water didn't go somewhere else, it ceased to be. And with it went the world that depended on its whims, leaving behind only questions etched in dust. For centuries, the river's vanished cities existed only as whispers, half-remembered names in crumbling manuscripts, or ghost stories told by nomads camping among the ruins. Then came the archaeologists, armed with satellite imagery and a stubborn refusal to let history stay buried. Their discoveries read like something from an adventure novel. Entire metropolises swallowed by dunes, their streets frozen in time beneath layers of wind-blown sand. One of the most dramatic finds happened in the 1980s when a team surveying the Thar Desert spotted strange geometric patterns in radar scans. Digging down, they uncovered the skeleton of a city so vast its walls ran for miles, a place ancient texts called the Emerald of the River, now bleached bone white by the sun. What makes these rediscoveries so astonishing isn't just their scale, but how they rewrite history. Take the Temple of Sambhara, which emerged from the dunes near Jaisalmer after a freak sandstorm exposed its spire. Inside, excavators found inscriptions describing a thriving port impossible in today's desert, until you realize the river once flowed just kilometers away. Even more telling were the ship anchors carved with Harappan symbols buried in the temple's courtyard. These weren't just religious artifacts, they were proof that ocean-going vessels had docked here, in a place now hundreds of miles from the sea. The real detective work, though, happens in the smallest details. In one abandoned workshop, archaeologists sifted through dust to find beads made from Baltic amber, evidence of trade networks stretching farther than anyone imagined. In another dig, a child's toy boat surfaced, its hull shaped like the cargo ships that once plied the river. But perhaps the most poignant clue came from a sealed cellar in Mohenjo-Daro's outskirts, where jars of river water had been carefully stored, as if someone hoped the old currents might return. Oral histories have proven just as crucial. Among the Rabari herders of Gujarat, elders still sing of the great water that walked away, their ballads matching geological records of the river's shifting course. One folktale describes a king who ordered his subjects to dig a canal to bring the river back, a story backed up by actual excavation findings of a massive, half-finished trench cutting across the desert. Technology has accelerated these discoveries. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried foundations invisible to the naked eye, while soil analysis can detect ancient riverbeds by their telltale mix of minerals. But sometimes the past announces itself without help. In 2016, monsoon rains eroded a hillside in Sindh to expose a staircase leading straight into the earth. What workers uncovered was a Buddhist stupa, its walls covered in murals showing boats laden with offerings, a silent testament to the river's sacred role. Every rediscovery peels back another layer of the mystery. A merchant's ledger found in Rajasthan lists taxes paid in water coins during droughts. A smuggler's cache intercepted near the Pakistani border contained seals from cities modern maps don't show. Even the sand itself holds clues, layers of silt and pollen that reveal not just where the river flowed, but when it breathed its last. These aren't just academic exercises. For communities living near the ruins, the river's legacy is painfully alive. Farmers in Bikaner still dig wells along its ghostly banks, hoping to tap into ancient aquifers. And in a dusty museum in Jodhpur, a single exhibit sums it all up: a broken clay pot, its interior stained with the residue of long evaporated water, resting beside a satellite photo showing the faint, crooked scar of a river that once fed empires. To understand why the river vanished, we must turn to nature's own record keepers, silent witnesses that have preserved its story in layers of ice, circles of wood, and flecks of pollen. Deep within Himalayan glaciers, scientists drill into ice cores, extracting slender cylinders that hold centuries of climate history. Each layer tells a tale: dust from dry years, bubbles of ancient air, even chemical traces of distant wildfires. One core, pulled from a high-altitude glacier near the river's source, revealed a chilling pattern, a 700-year stretch where snowfall dwindled to a trickle. The ice didn't just record the drought, it preserved its fingerprint, showing how thinning clouds starved the river at its birthplace. Then there are the trees. On the slopes where the river's tributaries once began, gnarled junipers cling to life, some over 1,000 years old. Their rings are time capsules, wide bands from years of abundant rain, narrow lines from times of struggle. By matching these patterns across living trees and ancient timber found in ruins, dendrochronologists have pieced together a timeline of catastrophe. The worst stretch, a 50-year period where the rings nearly vanish, a drought so severe it would have turned the river's headwaters to dust. But the most surprising clues come from pollen. In lakebeds along the river's former course, cores of sediment hold microscopic gold grains of pollen from plants that thrived or died with the river's moods. When the water flowed, pollen from rice and lotus dominated. Then, around 1,500 years ago, a stark shift. Pollen from drought-resistant shrubs and desert grasses takes over, painting a picture of a landscape gasping for moisture. Even more telling are the fungal spores mixed in species that flourish on animal dung. Their sudden drop suggests livestock herds collapsed, leaving nothing behind but silence. These natural archives don't just reveal the river's death, they show its slow suffocation. Pollen from deep layers tells of lush floodplains where elephants bathe. Higher up, salt-tolerant weeds appear, proof that the river grew sluggish, its waters evaporating faster than they could be replenished. By the time human records mention the river's decline, nature's ledger had already written its epitaph. The most haunting evidence lies in a single oak tree from Kashmir. Its rings show a golden age of growth, matching the height of Mauryan power, then a sudden stunting around 200 BC, just as imperial records note food shortages. The tree lived through the empire's fall, its rings growing steadily thinner until they stop altogether. A nearby core from the same era holds the final clue, a layer of wind-blown sand, thick as a finger, sealing the river's fate. Today, these clues aren't just about the past, they're warnings. The same techniques tracking the river's demise now monitor modern glaciers retreating at alarming speeds. Pollen in contemporary lakebeds shows invasive species marching into parched ecosystems, and those ancient junipers, their newest rings are narrower than any in a millennium. The river's story wasn't an anomaly, it was a preview. As one climatologist studying the cores put it, nature keeps receipts, and right now we're repeating the same mistakes that bankrupted an empire. The debate over what truly killed the river isn't just academic, it's a detective story with high stakes, where the suspects are both nature and humanity itself. On one side, ice cores and tree rings paint a picture of climatic shifts beyond human control, monsoons gone rogue, glaciers retreating under warming skies. But dig deeper and you'll find fingerprints of human interference everywhere. Ancient canals, some wide enough to sail boats through, siphoned water far beyond what the river could replenish. Charcoal layers in soil samples reveal vast forests set ablaze to clear farmland, stripping the land of its natural water-retaining sponge. And then there's the salt, tons of it, left behind in fields where over-irrigation evaporated, leaving behind a poison no crop could survive. The Aral Sea's modern tragedy mirrors this ancient disaster with eerie precision. Once the fourth largest lake in the world, it shrank to a ghost of itself in mere decades after Soviet engineers diverted its feeding rivers for cotton fields. Satellite images show the same grim transformation: fishing villages stranded in deserts, boats rusting on dunes, and a microclimate turned hostile as the vanished waters took the rains with them. The parallels are undeniable, just like the ancient river's cultivators. those Soviet planners believed they could outsmart nature's limits. Both learned the hard way that rivers aren't just resources to exploit, but living systems with breaking points. Yet the most unsettling question isn't about blame, it's about patterns. Why do civilizations repeat the same water mistakes, era after era? From the aquifers of California pumped dry to the vanishing Nile Delta, the playbook is tragically familiar. Short-term gains prioritized over long-term survival, political power tied to controlling water, and warnings from scientists dismissed until it's too late. Ancient Mauryan tax records even show farmers being rewarded for planting thirsty crops during droughts, a policy as self-destructive as modern subsidies for water-intensive agriculture in parched regions. But history doesn't have to be a loop. In Rajasthan's Thar desert, where the river once flowed, villagers now harvest fog with mesh nets, mimicking beetles that survive on desert mist. In Israel, drip irrigation, a technology first sketched in Babylonian clay tablets, wastes not a drop. These aren't just solutions, they're rebellions against the mindset that doomed the river. They prove that adaptation isn't about grand engineering, but humility working with water's limits rather than against them. The river's voice may be silent, but its lesson echoes. Civilizations thrive when they listen to the land. Not as conquerors, but as students, the next chapter of water history hasn't been written yet, and the pen is in our hands. When the river vanished, it left behind more than ruins. It birthed legends that twisted truth into myth, offering glimpses into how shattered civilizations made sense of the unthinkable. Among the Bhil tribes of Rajasthan, elders still recount the tale of the river goddess Sarasvati, who grew furious when kings built dams to hoard her waters. In their telling, she didn't just disappear, she coiled herself into the earth, vowing to return only when rulers learned humility. Archaeologists tracing this story's roots found something startling. Near the ancient city of Kalibangan, a massive dam structure lies shattered, its stones scorched as if by supernatural fire. Was this the wrath of the goddess the legends describe, or the aftermath of a desperate battle over dwindling water? Further south, the folklore takes a darker turn. Village children along the Gaga River whisper of the hungry ghosts, spirits of merchants who died with their cargo ships stranded in sudden sand. Locals avoid certain dunes at night, claiming to hear the clink of submerged coins and the cries of crews who perished when the water fled. These aren't just campfire tales. Divers have indeed found sunken merchant vessels in this now desert region, their hulls packed with trade goods no one lived to claim. One ship's cargo included a sealed chest of pearls, their surfaces etched with prayers to Varuna, the Vedic water god, perhaps a final offering from doomed sailors. But the most persistent legend is that of the river's curse. A 12th century Jain text describes a golden city named Patalpur, said to have been swallowed by the sands after its king executed a sage who warned of the river's decline. For centuries, treasure hunters scoured the desert seeking its walls. Then in 1982, a sandstorm exposed a citadel's golden spire near Jaisalmer, not solid gold, but gilded sandstone, exactly as described in the myth. Inside, excavators found skeletons in poses of sudden flight, their fingers clutching jars of water as if trying to carry the river itself to safety. These stories did more than entertain, they encoded survival knowledge. The Rabari herders' ballads speak of the river's bones, teaching listeners to dig where certain plants grow, revealing hidden groundwater veins. Scientists testing these mythical locations found ancient stepwells precisely where the songs said they'd be, their designs matching Harappan engineering. Even the tales of curses served a purpose, warning later generations against repeating the mistakes that doomed the river's cities. a folk song from Kutch lists forbidden acts cutting the kedri trees, building where the herons nest, all practices modern ecologists now recognize as triggers for desertification. Perhaps the most poignant legend comes from a crumbling monastery in Tibet. A mural there shows the Buddha weeping as a great serpent, the river's spirit, slithers into the underworld. The accompanying text warns that rivers die when compassion dries up, framing the catastrophe not as divine punishment, but as a natural consequence of human greed. It's a startlingly modern ecological message, preserved in pigment and prayer for 1500 years. These myths endure because they do what dry histories cannot. They let us feel the terror of watching a civilization's lifeline vanish and the desperate hope that someday the waters might return. In a village near the Pakistani border, women still sing to the dunes at dusk, their melodies mimicking the sound of rushing water. When asked why, they simply say, "So the river remembers its way home." The voices of those who witnessed the river's decline echo across centuries, preserved in crumbling scrolls and etched into temple walls. One of the most haunting records comes from the court scribe of King Devabuti, ruler of the Shunga Empire, who watched helplessly as his kingdom's lifeblood evaporated. In a decree dated to around 100 BCE, the king orders every citizen to dig deep, as if searching for the gods themselves, offering tax exemptions to those who could dredge new wells. The desperation in his words is palpable. Let no man rest until the earth sweats water again, for a kingdom without rivers is a body without breath. Archaeologists later found these very decrees buried in the ruins of Vidisha, their edges charred, likely stored in a granary that burned during food riots. Merchant logs from the same period tell an even grimmer story. A caravan master named Veshthala kept meticulous records on palm leaves, noting how trade routes withered one by one. His final entry, smudged with what might be tears, reads, "Sold the last water barrels today. The buyers were bandits, they paid in blood." Nearby, excavators uncovered his skeleton still clutching an empty waterskin, surrounded by the bones of his camels. But it's the personal accounts that cut deepest. A love poem inscribed on a broken clay pot by a farmer's wife begs the river goddess, "Return to us, even if just to laugh at our suffering." The pot was found upside down in the dust, likely placed as an offering at a hastily dug shrine. Nearby, children's footprints still mark the dried riverbed, preserved for millennia under layers of wind-blown sand. Perhaps the most chilling record comes from a Buddhist monastery near Taxila. A monk named Ashvaghosha scribbled a warning in the margins of a scripture: "When the river dies, kings become beggars and beggars become dust." Within decades, the monastery itself was abandoned, its prayer halls silent. The river's disappearance wasn't just an ecological event, it was a cultural unraveling, thread by thread, until the very fabric of civilization frayed. These records do more than document a catastrophe. They force us to confront the human face of collapse, not as abstract statistics, but as fathers digging graves for children who died of thirst, as mothers trading heirlooms for a single jug of muddy water, as poets whose verses turned from celebrating monsoons to cursing the sky. The river didn't just vanish, it took with it the hopes of everyone who ever knelt at its banks and prayed for tomorrow. The river's disappearance didn't just empty its banks, it shattered the very framework of power in ancient Asia, leaving warlords and kings scrambling to fill the void. Within decades, the political landscape fractured like dried mud, with old alliances crumbling and new powers emerging from the chaos. The most dramatic shift came in the northwest, where the Kushans, a nomadic confederation, once dismissed as barbarians, exploited the crisis to forge an empire stretching from Afghanistan to the Ganges. Their secret: they didn't rely on the river's whims. Instead, they mastered the art of moving wealth without water, building a network of camel caravans that could cross deserts where ships once sailed. Tax records from their capital at Purusharapura reveal a startling pivot. Where the Mauryans had taxed grain, the Kushans taxed silver and lapis lazuli, commodities light enough to carry across arid trade routes. Meanwhile, the Gupta Empire rose in the east by doing the opposite, doubling down on what little water remained. Their engineers perfected the art of harvesting monsoon rains, constructing vast stepped reservoirs called bodies that could hold water for years. Inscriptions boast of kings who made the skies their river, channeling every drop into fields of drought-resistant millet and cotton, but even their ingenuity had limits. As the river's delta shriveled, salt water crept inland, poisoning the Gupta's breadbasket. Their response, a desperate pivot toward the sea. Ports like Tamralipti, once sleepy fishing towns, ballooned into hubs for maritime trade, with Gupta coins turning up as far away as Oman and Java. The real geopolitical earthquake, though, was the rise of the Sassanids in Persia. With the overland trade routes collapsing, they seized control of the Persian Gulf, taxing every ship that bypassed the ruined river network. A recently deciphered clay tablet from their court brags of strangling the land routes to make the seas weep gold. Their dominance forced surviving Indian kingdoms to rethink everything. Diplomats who once traveled by river now sailed on monsoon winds, while spies smuggled maps of African coastlines searching for new allies. But the most enduring change was psychological. For centuries, rulers had seen rivers as the ultimate source of power. Now they learned to fear them. The Tibetan Empire, watching the catastrophe unfold, deliberately avoided building cities along major waterways, choosing highland forts instead. In China, Tang dynasty scrolls warn against tying an empire's belly to a single river's hunger. Even religions adapted. Jain texts from this period depict rivers as fickle deities, while Buddhist monasteries carved into cliff faces advertised their independence from waterborne trade. The lesson was clear: when a civilization's lifeline vanishes, survival belongs to those who can rewrite the rules. The river's absence didn't just redraw borders, it reshaped how empires thought about power itself, proving that sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what a river leaves behind, but the desperate ingenuity it forces into being. The story of Asia's vanished river isn't just a relic of the past, it's a mirror reflecting our present crisis, with modern waterways tracing the same perilous path toward collapse. Take the Colorado River, the lifeline of the American Southwest. Like its ancient counterpart, it's being strangled by overuse, its waters siphoned off to fill swimming pools in Las Vegas and irrigate alfalfa fields in the desert. Satellite images show the shocking truth. The river now rarely reaches its delta, leaving a cracked wasteland where wetlands once thrived. Sound familiar? It's the same pattern that doomed the Harappan civilizations, assuming nature's generosity was infinite until the day the taps ran dry. Halfway across the world, the Ganges tells an even starker tale. Revered as a goddess, yet treated as a sewer, its waters are now a toxic cocktail of industrial waste and untreated sewage. Ancient texts describe its currents as clear as crystal, but today, stretches of the river are biologically dead, incapable of supporting the fish that once fed millions. The cruel irony: just like the lost river's cultivators, modern farmers along the Ganges are drilling deeper wells, chasing vanishing groundwater, a short-term fix that's sinking the land itself. Parts of Delhi are subsiding at the rate of several inches per year, as if the earth is swallowing the mistakes of those who refuse to learn. But here's where the parallels grow truly unsettling. Glaciers feeding the Ganges are retreating faster than scientists predicted, mimicking the Himalayan ice loss that starved the ancient river. Researchers studying ice cores have found something chilling. The current rate of melt hasn't been seen in over 7,000 years. Meanwhile, monsoon rains, once as reliable as clockwork, now swing between biblical floods and withering droughts, a volatility that mirrors the death throes of the river that reversed empires. The lesson isn't just about water, it's about systems. Modern megacities, like their ancient predecessors, are built on fragile illusions of permanence. Phoenix, Arizona, imports water through canals that cross earthquake faults. Beijing has sunk so much groundwater that the city is literally compressing under its own weight. These aren't isolated crises, they're symptoms of the same arrogance that doomed the Mauryans the belief that engineering can outwit ecology indefinitely. Yet there's hope in the ruins. Along the vanished river's ghostly banks, archaeologists have found evidence of communities that adapted instead of fighting nature. One village switched from wheat to drought-resistant millet centuries before the collapse, their granaries still full when others lay empty. Today, that wisdom is being rediscovered. Rajasthan's farmers are reviving ancient rainwater harvesting systems, while California's vineyards are dry farming like their Mediterranean ancestors. Even Las Vegas, once the poster child for excess, now recycles 90% of its indoor water, proof that crisis can spark innovation. The vanished river's greatest warning isn't about scarcity, it's about time. Those who lived along its banks had generations to adapt, yet still failed to act until it was too late. We don't have that luxury. Climate change moves faster than tectonic plates, and the next great drought may not give us centuries to respond. But unlike the Harappans, we have something they lacked: the ability to read their story in the sand, and the choice to write a different ending. The question is whether we'll listen to the whispers of the past before they become screams. Today's explorers aren't trekking through jungles with machetes, they're scanning the Earth from orbiting satellites and listening to its whispers with ground-penetrating radar, hunting for echoes of the river that time forgot. One team working in Pakistan's Kholistan Desert made a breakthrough when their radar pinged back an unexpected pattern: a deep, winding trench of moist sediment, invisible on the surface but unmistakable in the data. Digging down, they found layers of river-smoothed pebbles and the fossilized roots of aquatic plants, proof that water once surged where now only dust devils dance. The real shock came when they matched this buried channel with descriptions from a 4,000-year-old Indus Valley seal, its carvings depicting boats sailing past a city that modern maps don't show. But the river's ghost isn't just hiding underground. NASA GRACE satellites designed to measure Earth's gravitational fluctuations accidentally revealed another clue. Over northern India, the satellites detected an anomaly: ancient groundwater so deep and old it predates human civilization. Hydrologists drilling into these reserves pulled up water laced with isotopes found only in long-vanished Himalayan glaciers, its chemical signature matching sediment cores from the lost river's delta. It's as if the river never truly left, it just retreated into the earth, waiting to be rediscovered. The most tantalizing hints, though, come from farmers who have spent generations coaxing crops from the desert. Near Rajasthan's shifting dunes, villagers point to patches where wheat grows unusually tall, its roots tapping into what they call the river's veins. Scientists testing these spots found underground layers of organic rich soil, telltale flood deposits extending for miles. One elderly farmer recounted his grandfather's advice: where the kedri trees grow in a line, dig there. Sure enough, thermal imaging shows those very trees clustered along a subsurface channel, their roots tracing the river's phantom path like stitches in a scar. Even language holds clues. Place names across the Thar Desert, Saravar, Lake, Nadi River mark sites where no water flows today. But when researchers overlay these names with satellite maps of underground moisture, they form a startling pattern, a dendritic network mirroring a river system. The most compelling is a village called Daravi, meaning threshold of the river. Beneath it lies a cavernous aquifer, not the scattered groundwater common in deserts, but a single, massive reservoir stretching kilometers, its water chemistry matching the lost river's headwaters. The search has taken explorers to unlikely places. In 2019, a team scanning the Rann of Catched Salt Flats uncovered a submerged forest, not the usual mangrove stands, but freshwater species that couldn't survive in today's brine. Carbon dating placed these trees at the precise moment the river failed, their trunks preserved in salt like a snapshots of collapse. Nearby, divers found stone anchors identical to those used by Harappan traders, clustered where no port could possibly exist today. The implications are staggering. This wasn't just a river dying, it was an entire coastline drowning as the sea rushed into the vacuum left by fresh water's retreat. What keeps scientists searching isn't just academic curiosity, it's the haunting possibility that fragments of the river might still flow. In 2022, a hydrogeologist following old well diggers' maps struck a pressurized aquifer near Jaisalmer. When drilled, it erupted in a 10-foot geyser of sweet-tasting water, fluid that hadn't seen sunlight for millennia. Isotopic analysis revealed it had been isolated since the river's disappearance, untouched by modern pollution or rainfall. Locals called it a miracle, but the data told a colder truth. This was the last, lonely remnant of a continental-scale waterway, imprisoned in rock while empires rose and fell above it. The river's full story may still lie buried, but each discovery peels back another layer of the mystery. From space-borne sensors to the wisdom of desert elders, the hunt continues not just for a lost waterway, but for the lessons its disappearance holds about our own fragile dance with nature's forces. As one researcher put it while studying a radar scan of yet another hidden channel, we're not just mapping a ghost, we're reading a warning. The river's absence didn't erase its memory, it seeped into the bedrock of culture, resurfacing in rituals, art, and even the names of places that haven't seen flowing water for millennia. Take the annual Sindh Darshan festival in Ladakh, where pilgrims gather to celebrate the Indus River with floating lamps and prayers. Few realize they're reenacting a tradition that once honored the vanished river's sister waterway, with hymns that archaeologists have traced back to Harappan chants. The lamps they release aren't just offerings, they're echoes of ancient barges that once carried firelit statues of the river goddess downstream, a practice depicted on seals found in Mohenjo-Daro's ruins. Even the landscapes whisper the river's name. Villages along the Gaga-Hakra basin, now a seasonal trickle, still bear titles like Sarasvati Nagar or Nadi Kakira, Mound of the River, though children playing there today have never seen a floodplain. Linguists studying these names uncovered something startling: clusters of settlements preserving the lost river's course like a map drawn in syllables. One hamlet called Dolavera sits hundreds of miles from any major waterway, yet its name translates to place of the white flood, matching geological evidence of catastrophic overflows that once reshaped the region. Art tells an even richer story. In a Kerala temple, a 15th-century mural shows Vishnu reclining not on the cosmic serpent Shesha as usual, but on a twisting, half-dried riverbed, a detail art historians link to folk memories of the Great Drought. Meanwhile, Rajasthani miniature paintings from the Mughal era feature ghostly blue veins beneath desert scenes, as if the artists couldn't shake the knowledge of what lay buried. The most poignant example, a set of terracotta tiles from Gujarat showing fish swimming upside down, a motif scholars now interpret as a metaphor for a world upended by the river's disappearance. The river's spiritual legacy runs deeper still. In Varanasi, priests still perform the artery ceremony with circular motions mimicking a river's whirlpools, a ritual that originated not on the Ganges, but as a tribute to the lost river's unpredictable eddies. DNA analysis of sacred tulsi plants grown along vanished trade routes reveals a genetic marker unique to varieties once cultivated in the river's floodplains, suggesting holy groves were deliberately preserved as living relics. Even the practice of throwing coins into wells, a global superstition, may trace back to Harappan water taxes, where metal offerings were placed in reservoirs to ensure the river's return. Perhaps the most unexpected survival is in cuisine. The Indus Valley's staple crop, a drought-resistant barley called soma, was thought extinct until food historians identified it growing wild near abandoned stepwells. Today, a handful of chefs in Jaisalmer have revived the grain, serving dishes based on excavated cookware residues. One dessert, a sesame and honey cake referenced in Vedic texts, contains trace minerals matching the lost river's silt, as if each bite carries a taste of the forgotten waters. These fragments form a mosaic of remembrance, proving that while empires may fall, cultural memory flows underground like a river searching for the sea. From the way potters in Kutch still shape jars with ribbed patterns mimicking water ripples, to the lullabies sung in Sindh that describe the great boat that sailed west and never returned, the past isn't truly gone. It's just waiting to be recognized, not in grand monuments, but in the quiet persistence of everyday rituals that have outlasted dynasties, droughts, and the river that once bound them all together. When the river vanished, it didn't just leave thirst in its wake, it sparked a revolution in survival. Societies that had relied on predictable floods for centuries suddenly faced a stark choice: innovate or perish. One of the most brilliant adaptations emerged from the desert sands, the Kanat system, a labyrinth of underground tunnels that tapped into distant mountain aquifers. Picture this: workers digging vertical shafts deep into the earth, then connecting them with gently sloping tunnels so water could flow for miles without evaporating under the scorching sun. These weren't just ditches, they were feats of engineering so precise that some Kanats still function today, 2,000 years after their construction. The secret lay in their design: air vents to prevent stagnation, sediment traps to keep the water clean, and ceramic linings to resist erosion. A single Kanat could sustain an entire oasis, turning wastelands into gardens where dates and pomegranates flourished. But water was only half the battle. With traditional wheat and barley failing, farmers turned to hardy newcomers, millet and sorghum, grains so drought-resistant they could grow on little more than morning dew. Archaeologists sifting through ancient granaries have found something telling: layers of wheat husks abruptly replaced by tiny millet seeds, evidence of an agricultural revolution born of desperation. These weren't just backup crops, they became staples, shaping diets from Rajasthan to Persia. A scribe's ledger from a Kushan trading post lists millet as the grain that laughs at drought, traded weight for weight with silver. Trade itself underwent a radical transformation. Where merchant ships once glided downriver, camel caravans now plodded across salt flats, their routes dictated by hidden waterholes rather than currents. The real game changer, the invention of the sand sail, a massive cloth sheets rigged to catch desert winds, reducing water consumption by dragging loads that would have required dozens of thirsty pack animals. A Byzantine traveler's diary describes these wind-powered caravans as land ships skimming over the waves of the dunes, their cargoes of spices and gems moving faster than horse-drawn carts. Perhaps the most unexpected innovation came from metallurgy. With riverbank clay no longer available for furnaces, smiths in Gandhara developed a portable forge fueled by dried animal dung, a technique that spread as far as Mesopotamia. Tests on swords from this era reveal a surprising truth. The absence of river water, rich in minerals, forced craftsmen to experiment with new alloys, accidentally creating blades stronger than anything forged before. A Persian chronicle boasts of a Gandharan sword that could cleave a helmet without losing its edge, a testament to necessity's ruthless ingenuity. Even architecture adapted. In Mohenjo-Daro's later layers, houses suddenly feature rooftop water catchments and walls lined with moisture-trapping lime plaster. But the real marvel lies beneath the streets, a network of ceramic pipes designed to recycle every drop of household wastewater into courtyard gardens. These weren't just utilities, they were acts of defiance, a civilization refusing to let its knowledge dry up with its river. The lesson written in these innovations is clear. Crisis doesn't just destroy, it forces reinvention. From the Qanats snaking beneath deserts to the wind-powered caravans crossing them, humanity's response to the river's disappearance proves that even the worst catastrophes can seed unexpected rebirth. The river's greatest legacy might not be what it took when it vanished, but what it compelled the survivors to create in its absence. Among the countless stories of displacement, one stands out: the journey of the potters from the dying river's delta. When their clay pits dried to dust and the kilns that once fired Harappan-style pottery cracked in the heat, they did the unthinkable. They walked, carrying nothing but sacks of precious river clay and the secrets of their craft. These refugees trekked hundreds of miles southwest, following rumors of a land where monsoons still fell. Archaeologists tracing their path found telltale clues: scattered shards of distinct black and red ware pottery marking their campsites like breadcrumbs across the Thar Desert. Their ultimate destination, the rugged hills of modern-day Gujarat, where local tribes still speak of the clay people who came with the drought. What happened next rewrote cultural history. The potters' arrival sparked an artistic revolution in their new home. Excavations at the site of Lothal reveal a stunning transformation. Crude local ceramics abruptly replaced by sophisticated wheel-thrown vessels identical to those from the vanished river cities. But this wasn't mere imitation. The refugees adapted, blending Harappan precision with local designs to create something entirely new. One particularly striking find is a water storage jar decorated with fish motifs from their homeland, yet shaped to fit the narrower necks of Gujarati carrying baskets. Even their kilns tell a story of fusion. The rectangular brick structures of the Indus Valley rebuilt with circular stone foundations preferred by the hill tribes. The potter's greatest legacy, though, wasn't in clay, it was in language. Linguistic analysis of ancient trade records shows something extraordinary. The word for water vessel in modern Gujarati, matki, derives directly from the Harappan term matka, preserved unchanged for over 3 millennia. Similarly, the intricate hand gestures still used by potters to measure vessel thickness match those depicted on Indus Valley seals. These weren't just refugees, they were living libraries, carrying entire cultural encyclopedias in their muscle memory and speech. Their influence rippled far beyond craft. Scrolls from a Buddhist monastery near Bharuch describe how the newcomers introduced floodwater farming techniques to their arid new home, digging diversion channels modeled on their lost rivers' irrigation systems. Satellite imagery confirms their impact. Fields along their migration route suddenly show the distinctive grid patterns of Harappan agriculture, visible centuries later as faint lines in the soil. One village's oral history tells of a stranger who taught the stones to drink, likely referring to the construction of underground water storage chambers, another Indus Valley innovation that allowed settlements to flourish where none existed before. But the most poignant evidence of their journey lies in ritual. During excavations at a Chalcolithic site in Saurashtra, archaeologists uncovered a row of broken pots buried upside down near what was once a spring. This exact practice vessels ritually killed to release their spirits had been common along the vanished river, meant to appease water deities. Here, thousands of miles from its origin, the tradition had taken root like a transplanted sapling. The potter's story mirrors countless others from that chaotic era. Bronze smiths who carried alloy recipes to Persia, turning desert copper mines into centers of metallurgy. Storytellers whose flood myths became the bedrock of new religions in Mesopotamia. Healers whose herbal knowledge traveled with them into the Deccan Plateau. Each group became a living bridge between worlds, proving that when civilizations collapse, their essence doesn't vanish, it migrates, mutates, and finds ways to endure. What began as desperate flight became an unplanned cultural transfusion, reshaping societies from the Gangetic Plains to the Persian Gulf. The river's children may have lost their home, but they refused to let their identity dry up with its waters. In their hands, survival became more than endurance, it became reinvention. The river's disappearance didn't just starve crops, it crippled armies that had built their strategies around its waters, turning once unstoppable war machines into desperate, thirsty shadows of their former selves. One of the most devastating examples comes from the collapse of the Shunga Empire's eastern campaign in 180 BCE, a military disaster historians now call the March of Dust. Scrolls recovered from a ruined garrison describe how 20,000 troops, fresh from victories in the Ganges Valley, set out to crush a rebellion in the arid south. Their plan relied on the river's tributaries to refill their waterskins and float supply barges laden with grain. But when they reached the expected waterways, they found only cracked earth and the bleached bones of fish. Within days, discipline unraveled. Soldiers drank their own horses' blood to stave off thirst, while scouts sent to find water vanished into the dunes. The final blow came when rebel forces, who knew the land's hidden springs, ambushed the Shunga army as it staggered through a dry riverbed. Carved into a nearby cliff, a survivor's graffiti tells the story in stark relief. "We fought the enemy for 1 hour and the desert for 10 days. The desert won. This wasn't an isolated tragedy. Across Asia, the river's retreat reshaped the very nature of warfare. The Mauryans, who once moved troops by the thousands on swift riverboats, were forced to march soldiers overland, a sluggish process that gave rebels and invaders time to prepare. Tax records from this period show the empire's cavalry shrinking as prized war horses, requiring vast amounts of water, died faster than they could be replaced. Even the composition of armies changed. Light infantry from desert regions, long dismissed as inferior to heavy Mauryan chariots, suddenly became invaluable for their ability to fight without reliable supply lines. A Kushan general's memoir boasts how his sand foxes outmaneuvered water-dependent enemies by luring them into waterless traps, a tactic that would later define desert warfare from Arabia to Mongolia. The river's absence didn't just weaken armies, it created new breeds of conquerors. Nomadic tribes like the Sakas, once confined to the fringes, exploited the chaos by mastering the art of dry logistics. Their secret, a network of hidden cisterns dug along trade routes, allowing them to strike deep into settled lands while their adversaries withered. Archaeologists have found these rainwater reservoirs, some still holding liquid after 2 millennia, marked by carvings of wolves, the Saka symbol for life in the wastes. Meanwhile, the river's delta, once a natural fortress guarded by waterways, became a death trap. A Sasanian spy's report describes how a Parthian garrison, besieged in a delta fortress, surrendered after their wells turned salty, unaware that the invaders were just a handful of archers who'd poisoned the water with tidal debris. Perhaps the most haunting evidence of this military revolution lies in the weapons themselves. Museum collections from this era show a sharp decline in ornate, heavy blades, the signature of professional armies, replaced by cruder but more versatile tools. A dagger unearthed near the lost city of Kalibangan tells the story. Its blade is reforged from a broken sword, its hilt wrapped in cloth to prevent blisters during long marches. Even siege warfare adapted. Where Mauryan engineers had relied on river clay to make millions of bricks for fortress walls, their successors turned to packed earth and sun-dried blocks faster to build, but tragically vulnerable to the very floods that no longer came. The river's ghost haunted every battle plan, every supply line, every desperate charge across ground that had once been underwater. Kings who'd waged war with the confidence of gods now hesitated, knowing their greatest enemy wasn't the army across the field, but the silent, shifting sands beneath their feet. In the end, the river didn't just vanish, it took with it an entire way of waging war, proving that no empire, no matter how mighty, can conquer the land when the land itself turns against them. The river's ghost might have faded from memory entirely, if not for one stubborn British geologist who refused to let history's greatest waterway vanish without a trace. In 1872, a young Alexander Cunningham, fresh from surveying India's ancient temples, stumbled upon a series of crumbling brick mounds near the dry bed of the Gaga River. Local villagers called them the Demon's Teeth, but Cunningham saw something else: the precise geometric patterns of Harappan architecture, identical to ruins he'd studied along the Indus. When he traced these scattered mounds on a map, they formed a staggering line stretching 250 miles across the desert, a path too straight, too deliberate to be natural. His heart raced as the realization struck. This wasn't just an abandoned settlement. He was standing on the bones of a river. Skeptics mocked his phantom waterway theory. The colonial establishment dismissed it as romantic Orientalism, while Indian scholars, rightfully wary of British interference, accused him of inventing myths to justify land grabs. Even the weather conspired against him. Dust storms erased his survey markers, scorpions nested in his boots, and fever nearly claimed his life twice. But Cunningham pressed on, bribing camel drivers to lead him to remote ruins where he found anchors buried in sand dunes and freshwater mollusk shells in soil samples. His breakthrough came when he matched descriptions from the Rigveda, a 3,000-year-old text praising the mighty Sarasvati, with the geological evidence. The sacred verses spoke of a river wide as the sky, flowing between the Yamuna and Sutlej, exactly where his map showed a gap. The final clue came from an unexpected source: railroad engineers. While laying tracks through the Thar Desert, they'd hit layers of water-rounded pebbles 60 feet below the surface, impossible in a region that hadn't seen perennial rivers in recorded history. Cunningham begged for samples, spending nights hunched over a microscope comparing them to Himalayan sediment. When the mineral composition matched, he knew. This wasn't just a river, it was the river, the lost artery of an entire civilization, now buried under centuries of dust. His 1875 report should have been a triumph. Instead, it gathered dust in colonial archives for decades, dismissed as the fever dream of a sunstruck antiquarian. It took another explorer, Hungarian archaeologist Aurel Stein, to vindicate his work in the 1920s. Trekking along Cunningham's coordinates with modern tools, Stein found entire cities buried along the dry channel, their streets aligned with the vanished current. One particularly poignant discovery: a warehouse full of Indus Valley seals depicting boats, unearthed in a desert where no ship had sailed for millennia. Cunningham never lived to see his theory confirmed. He died in 1893, his notebooks filled with sketches of riverine cities most colleagues believed were fantasy. Today, satellite imagery proves what his gut knew all along, that beneath the dunes lies the skeleton of a waterway so vast it could have swallowed the Nile. His story isn't just about scientific discovery, it's a reminder that sometimes the most important truths begin as heresies whispered against the wind. What if we could turn back the clock not with words but with water? Some engineers and dreamers aren't content to let the river stay buried. Their radical proposal: divert modern waterways like the Sutlej or Yamuna to trace the ghostly path of the vanished giant, essentially resurrecting an ancient lifeline with bulldozers and concrete. The vision is staggering: satellite-guided canals snaking through the Thar Desert, pumping stations pulling Himalayan meltwater hundreds of miles across dunes, and parched villages blinking awake to the sound of rushing water for the first time in millennia. Proponents point to China's South-North Water Transfer Project, a man-made river system longer than the Nile, as proof that rewriting geography isn't science fiction. But the costs go deeper than budgets. Ecologists warn that stealing water from one basin to feed another could trigger catastrophe downstream. The Sutlej already struggles to reach Pakistan's farmlands. Diverting its flow might spark conflicts fiercer than those that followed the river's original disappearance. Then there's the land itself. Centuries of adaptation have turned the desert into a fragile ecosystem. Flash floods from artificial channels could erase rare salt flats where migratory birds nest, or drown the very ruins we're trying to honor. A team from the Central Arid Zone Research Institute found something haunting when they modeled the idea. Reviving the river might ironically destroy the qanats and stepwells that became symbols of resilience after its death. The ethical dilemmas multiply. Who gets priority: farmers along the new route or cities currently dependent on donor rivers? Would water become a tool for political control as it did in Mauryan times? Indigenous communities like the Bishnoi, who have worshipped the river's memory for generations, fear their sacred sites could become construction zones. And what of archaeology? The proposed canal route cuts straight through unexcavated Harappan settlements, their secrets still packed in sun-baked soil. Yet the boldest argument for revival isn't practical, it's poetic. Imagine the cultural resurrection: fishermen casting nets where their ancestors' boats sank into sand, children splashing in currents that once carried empires. A pilot project in Rajasthan's Gajno Wildlife Sanctuary offers a glimpse after engineers recharged a dried-up tributary. Migratory fish species unseen for centuries suddenly reappeared, their DNA matching bones found in nearby ruins. It's as if the land remembered. Perhaps the answer lies not in conquering nature again, but collaborating with it. Instead of massive diversions, some hydrologists propose a mosaic solution: chains of small check dams to guide monsoon rains along the old riverbed, or solar-powered wells tapping the deep fossil aquifers that still whisper with the river's ancient waters. After all, the original river didn't vanish in a day. Its return shouldn't be forced in one either. This isn't just about water, it's about confronting our deepest myth, that progress means bending the world to our will. The river's story warns that domination has limits, but its silent banks also whisper another truth: endings aren't forever. Whether through engineering or patience, the choice we make will ripple far beyond canals and crops. It will define what kind of ancestors we become to the next civilization watching their rivers fade. The vanished river of ancient Asia wasn't alone in its mysterious disappearance across the world. Other waterways have slipped into myth, leaving behind empty channels and unanswered questions. Take the Sarasvati, celebrated in Vedic hymns as the mightiest of rivers, now reduced to a seasonal trickle in the Rajasthan desert. Like our lost river, the Sarasvati once fed thriving civilizations, its banks dotted with Harappan cities that suddenly emptied when the waters retreated. But here's the eerie difference. While the Sarasvati's decline was gradual, choked by tectonic shifts that diverted its tributaries, our vanished river seems to have unraveled in fits and starts, with catastrophic floods punctuating long droughts. Sediment cores tell the tale, layers of silt sandwiched between bands of wind-blown sand, as if the river couldn't decide whether to fight or surrender. Then there's the Oxus of Central Asia, a river so vital to Persian empires that its disappearance became legend. Ancient maps show it flowing into the Caspian Sea, but today it dies a slow death in the Karakum Desert, its final drops swallowed by cotton fields. The Oxus shares our river's fate. Overuse, climate shifts, and political greed bled it dry, but with one chilling twist. Where our river's demise scattered cultures, the Oxus's retreat erased entire nations. The Khwarezm Empire, once a beacon of Islamic learning, crumbled into dust when the river changed course, its libraries and observatories abandoned to the dunes. But why do some rivers vanish while others endure? The Nile offers a clue. For millennia, it has weathered droughts and dams, its floods still mostly predictable. The secret, a headwater system so vast spanning lakes and tributaries across 11 countries that no single disaster can kill it. Our lost river had no such safety net. Born from a handful of Himalayan glaciers and monsoon rains, it was a precision instrument, magnificent when conditions aligned, but fragile as a house of cards when they didn't. The contrast grows starker when you compare endings. The Sarasvati faded with a whimper, its name lingering in prayers long after the water stopped. The Oxus went kicking and screaming, its death accelerated by Soviet-era canals that turned its delta into a salt flat. But our river, it left behind ghosts, fishermen's nets fossilized in desert sand, temple carvings of fish gods venerated in landlocked villages. Even the languages spoken along its phantom banks hold traces of aquatic vocabulary, like echoes of a drowned world. Perhaps the most haunting difference lies in what followed. When the Sarasvati shrank, its people migrated east to the Ganges, transplanting their culture to new waters. The Oxus refugees became nomads, scattering across the steppes. But our river's children had no obvious escape, just a slow, grinding adaptation to a world where water no longer flowed, but had to be hunted underground. Their survival wasn't a triumph, but a reckoning, and that's the river's final lesson. Disappearance isn't just about water, it's about who we become when the maps we trusted turn to lies. Even after centuries of research, the vanished river guards its deepest secrets with the stubbornness of a locked vault. One burning question haunts every scientist studying its ghostly path: was this catastrophe avoidable? Some argue the river was doomed the moment Himalayan glaciers began retreating, a natural cycle no ancient engineer could reverse. Others point to the Harappans' own hands, their sprawling cities and thirsty crops demanding more water than the land could sustainably give. A provocative theory even suggests the river might have survived if not for a perfect storm of human and natural pressures, like a rope frayed strand by strand until it snaps. The unsettling truth, we may never know for certain whether this was an ecological murder or suicide. Then there's the riddle of its sudden vanishing act. Geological records show most rivers don't disappear overnight. They dwindle, shift course, or break into smaller streams. But sediment cores from this river's delta tell a different story. Layers of fertile silt abruptly capped by sterile sand, as if someone flipped a switch. Was this the work of a mega-earthquake, like the one that diverted the Brahmaputra in 1750? Or did a final, catastrophic flood, the river's death spasm, scour its own bed so violently that the waters couldn't regroup? Satellite scans have revealed a suspicious depression near the river's former headwaters, possibly the scar of a landslide that strangled its source. Yet until someone drills deep into that unstable terrain, the mystery remains as fluid as the river itself. Perhaps the most tantalizing question isn't about the past, but the future. Could this river ever return? Hydrologists studying underground aquifers along its ancient path have made a startling discovery: pockets of fossil water so old they still carry the chemical signature of Himalayan ice. Some believe these reserves could be recharged during extreme monsoon years, creating a ghostly echo of the original flow. Others dream bigger, suggesting engineered canals could one day reconnect the Sutlej and Yamuna rivers, effectively resurrecting the lost waterway like surgeons grafting veins onto a phantom limb. The obstacles are staggering: political disputes, ecological risks, the sheer scale of bending nature to human will, but the vision persists. After all, if the ancient Nabateans could carve a civilization from desert rains, why couldn't modern ingenuity rewrite this river's ending? The greatest enigma, though, lies buried in the ruins themselves. Why did some cities along the river's banks collapse while others adapted? At Rakhigahi, archaeologists found granaries stuffed with millet, proof that some Harappans saw the crisis coming and switched to drought-resistant crops. Yet just 50 miles downstream, the people of Kalibangan kept planting water-hungry wheat until their fields turned to dust. Was this stubbornness, bad leadership, or something darker, a refusal to believe their God could abandon them? The answer might reshape how we face our own climate crises today. New technologies promise breakthroughs. Ground-penetrating radar now peers deeper into desert sands, while isotopic analysis of ancient teeth reveals migration patterns triggered by the drought. But the river's ultimate lesson may be humility. For all our satellites and scanners, we're still piecing together its story like children assembling a shattered vase, marveling at each fragment, but never quite seeing the whole. Perhaps that's how it should be. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only remembered, so the next civilization learns to listen when the rivers start to whisper their warnings. The thirst for water that toppled ancient empires never truly vanished. It merely changed shape, resurfacing in modern conflicts where rivers are both lifelines and weapons. Today, the same regions once nourished by the lost river are flashpoints in a new era of water wars, proving history's lessons often drown in the clamor of short-term gains. Along the Indus, where Harappan farmers once prayed for floods, nuclear-armed India and Pakistan now spar over dams and diversions, each accusing the other of water terrorism. Satellite images reveal a grim irony. The same canals built to replace the vanished river's bounty now run dry downstream, stranding Pakistani farms while Indian reservoirs swell. Sound familiar? It's the Mauryan tax collector's dilemma replayed with satellites and lawsuits, a zero-sum game where upstream control means downstream collapse. Meanwhile, China's colossal hydro-engineering projects on the Brahmaputra, dubbed the New Great Wall of Water, mirror the ancient river's fate in reverse. By redirecting glacial meltwater to fuel its own growth, Beijing risks starving the Ganges and Mekong, leaving millions in India and Southeast Asia vulnerable. A declassified intelligence report even cites ancient Harappan irrigation maps as a cautionary tale, noting how over-extraction turned fertile plains into dust bowls. Yet the dams rise higher, as if modern engineers believe concrete can outwit climate cycles that humbled empires. The parallels grow darker when you examine tactics. Just as soccer nomads poisoned delta wells to cripple Mauryan forts, modern militants target water infrastructure. ISIS weaponized the Euphrates in Syria, while Afghan warlords routinely blow up irrigation canals. But the subtler violence lies in policy. In Rajasthan, where the lost river's ghost channels still trace the sand, farmers digging illegal wells drain aquifers faster than monsoons can replenish them. The result, a replay of the ancient crisis, villages abandoned, children pulled from school to haul water, and a generation growing up believing drought is destiny. What makes today's conflicts more perilous isn't just climate change, it's the illusion of control. Ancient kings at least blamed the gods when rivers failed. Modern leaders blame each other while repeating the same mistakes. Pakistan's cotton fields guzzle Indus water as recklessly as Harappan wheat fields drain their lost lifeline. India's subsidized rice paddies in Punjab, a desert state, siphon groundwater at rates that would have horrified Mauryan engineers. And beneath it all, the same fatal assumption that rivers are property, not living systems with limits. The solution might lie in unexpected places. In Gujarat, villagers revived a 3,000-year-old tradition by building check dams modeled on Harappan designs, capturing monsoon rains to recharge wells. Along the Mekong, activists push for water diplomacy, inspired by ancient Kushan trade pacts, where shared resources meant shared survival. Even Israel and Jordan, despite hostilities, cooperate on desalination, proof that water can be a bridge rather than a battlefield. History's echo here is unmistakable. Civilizations that treat water as a commodity crumble, while those that treat it as a covenant endure. The lost river's voice whispers through every modern conflict, not as a lament but as a warning, one we ignore at our own peril. The rivers we take for granted today are the same lifelines that once nourished vanished civilizations, threads of water connecting us not just to the past, but to every generation yet to come. Protecting them isn't just about conservation, it's about honoring a covenant with history itself. Start by listening to the stories these waterways already tell. The Colorado River's shrinking delta, the Ganges choking pollution, the Indus's political stranglehold, they're not just headlines. They're echoes of the same warnings ignored by empires that now lie buried under dunes. Small actions ripple outward like water circling a stone. Fixing a leaky faucet saves hundreds of gallons a year, trivial alone, but transformative if millions join in. Support farmers using drip irrigation, a method so ancient its roots trace back to the Kannats of desert survivors. Advocate for policies that treat rivers as living systems, not plumbing networks. In Rajasthan, villagers revived dried springs by replanting sacred groves mentioned in Harappan texts, proving ancient wisdom often holds the key to modern resilience. The most powerful tool, your voice. Document local waterways with photos and notes, creating a living archive that tracks changes over time. Join citizen science projects monitoring river health, or simply share the story of the lost Asian river with someone who's never heard its cautionary tale. When a community in Karnataka discovered their neglected lake was once part of a vanished trade route, they transformed it into a conservation hub, blending archaeology with ecology. Hope flows where people choose to act. In Bangladesh, floating schools now teach children on solar-powered boats as rising seas reclaim land, a brilliant adaptation echoing the river cultures of old. Along the Los Angeles River, artists paint murals of extinct fish where concrete channels once buried the water's soul, slowly convincing the city to peel back the pavement. Even the Aral Sea, once written off as dead, is whispering back to life thanks to Kazakh engineers redirecting strayed tributaries. Rivers don't just carry water, they carry memory. Every restored wetland, every protected tributary, every policy that prioritizes sustainability over short-term gain is a stitch in the fabric of a more resilient future. The lost river of Asia didn't vanish in a day. Its disappearance was the sum of countless small neglects. By reversing that equation, through countless small acts of care, we write a different ending. Not just for our rivers, but for the civilizations, including our own, that depend on their mercy. The story of this vanished river is more than an ancient mystery. It's a mirror held up to our own fragile relationship with the natural world. For centuries, empires knelt at its banks, drawing life from its currents, convinced their power was eternal. Yet when the waters retreated, those same civilizations crumbled like sandcastles at high tide. The lesson is as brutal as it is timeless. No kingdom, no matter how grand, can outlast the land that feeds it. We see this pattern etched across history: the Maya choking on drought, Angkor Wat swallowed by jungles, the Anasazi vanishing into canyon shadows, all reminders that nature writes the final chapter of every human story. What makes this river's tale so haunting isn't just its disappearance, but how ordinary its collapse seemed at first. A dry season here, a failed crop there, small warnings drowned out by the noise of progress. By the time priests scrambled to appease the gods and kings ordered canals dug, the river was already a ghost. Today, we face our own whispers of crisis: dwindling aquifers, vanishing glaciers, rivers that no longer reach the sea. Parallels are uncomfortable. Like the Mauryan tax collectors demanding grain from barren fields, we pump water from depths that took millennia to fill, acting as if tomorrow's thirst won't come due. Yet buried in this tragedy is a seed of hope. Along the river's forgotten path, archaeologists found something unexpected: a single village that outlasted the rest. Their secret: they stopped fighting the drought and learned to dance with it. While others clung to wheat, they planted millet. While nobles hoarded water, they shared it. Their wells were shallow but sustainable, their prayers not for floods but for wisdom. In their humility lay resilience, a truth we're relearning today through rainwater harvesting and regenerative farming. So here's the question that lingers like morning mist: what rivers are we taking for granted now? Not just the ones we can see: the Colorado, the Nile, the Ganges, but the invisible currents that sustain us: groundwater aquifers, monsoon cycles, even the atmospheric rivers that shape our weather. History whispers that civilizations don't fall when resources vanish, but when they refuse to change. The river that reversed empires didn't abandon its people, it revealed their illusions of control. As you scroll through maps or sip a glass of water today, consider this: every drop carries the ghost of a choice. Will we repeat the mistakes etched in desert ruins, or write a new story where rivers and humans flow together? The sand holds no answers, only echoes. Now it's your turn. Share in the comments. What forgotten turning points in history make you pause, and what lessons might they hold for the world we're building now? The conversation, like the river's legacy, never truly ends.